It's really an honor and a pleasure to have this forum and to be able to invite speakers like the two we're hearing from today. By way of an alert, next Friday is the third of the three Friday forums we set aside to look deeply at the 2020 election. Next week, we'll have constitutional lawyer and former National Lawyers Guild President Marjorie Cohn speak, and ACLU lawyer here in Southern California, Andres Kwan. By next Friday, they will be able to dig even deeper into some of the ongoing legal aspects of this election, as well as the consequences of it. This is a sophisticated group, so I think we can recognize that in American politics, nothing is only as it seems. Nothing is an unalloyed victory. There is much that we need to recognize in terms of the challenges that this country faces. ICUJP has never been dependent on who is in the White House, in the sense that we have never let up on our mission that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence, and all the implications of that domestically and nationally, regardless of who may be temporarily in the White House. We follow what I've called an inside-outside strategy, depending on who's in the White House. Support a president when we think they're doing the right thing, oppose that president, that very same president, when they're doing the wrong thing. And in our 19 years, we've applied that to George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. And we have every expectation and plan to do it with President Joe Biden. The challenges we face, which Greg Palast and Colleen Flynn will talk about today, are really what this election means. And what does it mean to the progressive values that ICUJP represents, that the people in on this screen that you're looking at, and their varied organizations, congregations, freelance activism, is this, what challenges do we face? Time magazine said that Joe Biden will govern in a Trump America. And if you pause that and think that Trump got at least 8 million more votes this time and is nearing 72 million votes. Those are people that voted for him. So Trumpism is the label we for 4 years have given white supremacy and other features of his program. He didn't invent any of that. He took the lid off the garbage can and exposed it and gave it power and impetus. But these deep strains continue to exist in American life, and it's our job to confront those and to be able to try to understand it and to organize around it. To do that today, we're very grateful to be joined by two extraordinary people. Greg Palast, I stretched my memory of our 19 years, and I do believe Greg has been with us in the past at conferences and events and programs. Greg is an award-winning journalist and author who has broken front page stories for BBC Television Newsnight, The Guardian, Nation Magazine, The Rolling Stone, known for complex undercover investigations using skills I discovered he learned as a corporate fraud investigator, which must have come in very handy these 4 years. Greg has exposed stories including the theft of the 2000 US election in Florida, BP's Deepwater Horizon blowout, and the Bush administration's secret pre-invasion plans for the oil fields in Iraq, among other countless stories. He's still active, and his latest book, which I'm eager to hear him discuss as of today, is How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters, which was released in July in the midst of the campaign. He's also written the New York Times bestsellers Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, Armed Madhouse, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and the highly acclaimed Vulture's Picnic, named Book of the Year in 2012 on the BBC Newsnight Review. Later toward the end of the program, we're going to indicate how folks can order How Trump Stole 2020, Greg's new book. Colleen Flynn, as I think she will elaborate on later in her remarks, represented at least 2 people on this screen that I see today, because Colleen was one of a team of National Lawyers Guild lawyers that represented us at an ICUJP demonstration in which Carol Francis and several others and the beloved Ralph Fertig were arrested. And I won't steal her thunder because I think it links her not only to our work, but it's an example of the kind of work she's done for so many years. Colleen is a board member of the National Lawyers Guild and is a civil rights attorney with extensive experience representing those engaged in collective action for social justice. She represents student, workers, immigrants, artists, activists who've been targeted by the police and criminal systems for exercising their rights. She conducts Know Your Rights trainings and serves as a legal observer, one of those wonderful green hats we see at our demonstrations and others, at protests to document and hopefully deter police misconduct. The format for today is that Greg will speak for about 15 minutes, giving us an overview on his immediate reactions to the elections, the implications of it, and some kind of path forward. Colleen then will speak for the same time, really looking at the role that public mass demonstrations have played in the movement for justice and in the activities over this summer, which I personally think have had a tremendous influence on public debate. She'll talk a little bit about her role with ICUJP. Then we'll have a little inter-panel conversation among the 2 speakers, and then we definitely want to get to questions and answers with both of our speakers. So it's really a personal pleasure because I know his work, I know the impact he's had in independent journalism. So I'm thrilled to turn the program over to Greg Palast.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. Honor to be here with Colleen and with the whole group here. Thank you so much. By the way, we had a 1-minute film. Are you able to play that, Steve?
Yes, let me pull that up right now.
Why don't we pull that? That will give you a good idea of what it is I've been working on and what we do, including with the National Lawyers Guild. Let's see if we can get that going.
Greg, what geographical location are you in these days?
Well, right now I've moved back from London to Hollywood, so I'm here right up near you.
Excellent.
Cuddly and close, but socially distanced.
Thank you.
Okay.
In 2016, the president was elected by a tiny number of voters, 77,744 votes in 3 states, about the same as a Beyoncé concert. What you didn't know was that 1,800,000 voters disappeared. Their voter registration
What happened there?
registrations were canceled and their voices silenced.
And today to come out and not be able to vote and no one can give you an explanation, like, it's extremely emotional and it bothers me. It bothers me to my core.
Investigative journalist Greg Palast discovered that their votes were intentionally suppressed.
Mr. Kemp, are you removing black voters from the voter rolls?
Young voters and people of color are the targets of this big purge of voters. The good news is that this year we have the names of the people that are at risk of having their votes stolen. SaveMyVote2020.org. Check to see if your registration has been canceled and follow the link to re-register now.
All right. What that was a film so far seen by 7 million people, mainly because it was released I think it's an important film, but it was released by Leonardo DiCaprio from his Instagram page, my producer. And if you want to see the 14-minute version, which is it really tells you what's going on in America with voting, again, go to Leonardo DiCaprio's Instagram story page or to gregpalast.com. So here's what I'm here to tell you is that Donald Trump is right. The election was rigged. There's massive fraud in the U.S. electoral system. Where he's wrong, well, he knows it's rigged because his cronies rigged it. And the fraud is not committed by voters. I actually took the expert on voter fraud is a professor from Rutgers named Lorraine Minetti. And I took her statistics, and I'm a statistician by training. And it turns out that the probability that you will commit voter fraud, that is, send in an illegal mail-in ballot or show up and pretend that you're George Washington and you want to vote an extra time. The chance you'll commit voter fraud is 1/5 of the chance that you will be struck and killed by lightning. Voters don't commit fraud because, number one, I used to work for the Justice Department. I can tell you, and for attorneys general, you commit voter fraud, we'll bust you and you'll go to jail for 5 years at least. So what's going on here? What do I mean that the election was rigged? That Trump is right? Because his cronies rigged it. What do I mean by that? In America, we have a nasty little secret. We don't count all the votes, and we don't let all the people vote. In that 1 minute film, you saw a woman in tears saying, you show up to vote and you're not on the voter rolls and they won't tell you why. This was a film. I was there at the polling station in Atlanta when I filmed her. She was not talking about her own vote. She was talking about her grandmother, 92 years old. She'd been voting at the same polling station for 50 years. When she showed up, they said, you're no longer registered here. Get out. Ultimately, she went back in and got a provisional ballot, which was not counted. We'll get the provisionals. So why was she removed from the voter rolls? This is in Georgia. And our nation is, what's happening in Georgia now will determine the future of our nation. It wasn't determined, by the way, on November 3rd. It will be determined on January 5, when there are two Senate seats up for grabs in Georgia. Whoever wins those seats controls the U.S. Senate. What happened to that voter? 92 years old, 50 years voting at the same station. They said, get out. They said that she had moved. So I went with her, Miss Christine Jordan, to her home. The home that they said that she moved out of. And there on the wall was a picture of Martin Luther King having dinner with her in that home, which is pretty good proof for me as an investigator that she's been there at least 60 years. I said, you knew Dr. King? She says, that's my cousin. But that also explains why she was removed. Her crime, and the crime of, are you ready? 340,134 other voters in Georgia were illegally, wrongly removed for voting. Overwhelmingly in that list their crime was voting while black. That was their only crime. They didn't move. Now, how do I know that? Well, I did what the state of Georgia didn't do, but the law requires. We discovered that they didn't even check with the post office. So I hired the post office and I hired the nation's top experts in who moves, where are people living, from eBay and Amazon and Google. These companies have the ultimate experts in where you live. They know where you were last Thursday at 2 p.m. That's right, Colleen. Don't get nervous. I won't give up your secrets. But I can know where you were. Anyone in this room know everything about you. 1,700 data points that we follow dynamically. So they removed 1/3 people before Stacey Abrams ran for governor. She lost by about 50,000 votes after removing 1/3 of her voters, including Martin Luther King's cousin. You saw those people being just disappearing, vanished. Raheem Shabazz, Ashley Jones, Jasmine Bakhtiar. These are people who were removed from the voter rolls illegally for supposedly moving. This trick has been moved across the nation to Wisconsin, to Michigan, to Ohio, to 30 states altogether. According to the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, and then publicized by the Brennan Center, 16.7 million people were purged from the voter rolls in the 2 years leading up to this election. 16.7 million people. Now, people do die, people do move about it, but we've analyzed the list. We didn't scientifically sample. We took 5 states and we went through the list, every single name individually, not a scientific sample, and found out that in Michigan, they removed 300,000 people, 152,000 illegally. In Georgia, they just removed, the ACLU just issued my report showing in Georgia, 198,351 people removed illegally. In Wisconsin, another key swing state that Biden won by inches. Well, one of the reasons he won by inches is that we looked at a purge list. The Republican legislature passed a bill saying you have to remove everyone from this list called the Eric list, by the way, which was originally created by the Pew Charitable Trust. Look out for white people trying to do good. It's called the Eric Mover list. The ACLU stopped it from being implemented in California, by the way. So the ACLU issued my report in Georgia. In Wisconsin, we issued the report, and the bipartisan elections board said, yeah, you're right, this purge list is junk. And despite it being the law that they had to remove 153,000 people, they haven't removed any. They're in court, but that court ruling won't obviously hasn't come down. So imagine Donald Trump supposedly won Wisconsin in 2016 by 22,000 votes. It looks like Joe Biden is now going to win Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. So that's a 44,000 vote swing. But let me tell you this, they were going to remove 153,000 voters. And we looked at the race of each of those voters, which you can do using census tracts and other information. 100,000 of those voters at least were students, and the biggest single group were African Americans. The third group were Hispanics. And here's the key thing. Well, hey, Hispanics and young people and old and black people die. They do move. But in this case, they didn't. They didn't move at all. Including, for example, they said that a woman named Sequana Taylor had moved. Well, Sequana Taylor, who you'll meet in the 14-minute film, again at gregpalast.com, they said Sequana Taylor moved from Milwaukee. Well, if you move from Milwaukee, you shouldn't vote in Milwaukee. So we went to Milwaukee with my crew just before the lockdown. And I said to Sequana, why are you voting in Milwaukee? It's against the law if you don't live here. And she says, well, I live here. I said, prove it. She says, look at the building behind me. Had her name on it. She was a Milwaukee County supervisor. Do you think that she moved from Milwaukee? I don't think so. but she was guilty of attempting to vote while black. We stopped that purge. We stopped that purge. If they had removed those voters, Trump would have won and swept Wisconsin. He would have won by 50,000 again. Michigan, 300,000 voters. How could the state with Detroit and the United Auto Workers go to Trump by 10,700 votes in 16? This time he barely lost because of this mass purge of voters. So our Senate may be decided by the mass purge of voters. Now here's what we're doing. With Jeannie Meyer of the National Lawyers Guild, I told you that the ACLU put out my report, but now I'm turned to the chief counsel for the Palast Investigative Fund. I run a not-for-profit foundation, is Jeannie Meyer, who's been many years an officer and leader of the National Lawyers Guild. Great organization. And we sued the Secretary of State to get these lists, to open up his files, and we won. And by the way, Jeannie and our attorneys were paid by the Republican Secretary of State. The reason I mention he's a Republican, I should also mention he's white, is that we have this crazy system in the U.S. of having these violently partisan officials. Catherine Harris in Florida, Ken Blackwell in Ohio, and probably one of the most vicious vote suppressors in the nation, a guy named Alex Padilla in California, and it was one of the worst. And so we sued him successfully, and we're going to sue him again to return these voters to the voter rolls in time for this runoff election of January 5th for the U.S. Senate. Now, I could go on, but look, the key here is that it's race. What do? They know it's race and age. They know that young people move. You don't lose your vote, by the way, if you move dorm room to dorm room. You don't lose. I know a Savannah voter that lost her vote because she moved around. That was my daughter. And of course, renters, low-income people, move within apartment buildings, move within their neighborhoods. You can't lose your vote for that. So, but again, they have all these wonderful ways of targeting Black folk. And this began, I've been doing this 20 years. This began in 2000 when I was working for The Guardian and BBC Television. I was living in London. And in 2000, it's the Bush-Gore campaign election. It was called for Al Gore, but I'm watching all these Black people come before the cameras and say I couldn't vote. So I thought, well, look, the investigator I am said, well, maybe there's a computer program that is knocking off Black voters off the voter rolls. And sure enough, I got a couple computer disks and found out that the Secretary of State of Florida had removed 58,000 people, almost all of them Black. I'm not guessing because it says BLA next to their name on the registration, blah, 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 for Black, Black, Black. And they accused 58,000 Black people of being ex-cons, felons who can't vote in Florida. Well, it turns out none were ex-cons, illegal voters. Zero. But George Bush became president of the United States by 537 votes. That's it. That won the Electoral College in Florida, the electoral votes of Florida, and that made him president. Now, once again, so in other words, George Bush became president by 500 votes, excluding 58,000 Black people from the voter rolls of Florida. It was so successful. Florida was the first state to computerize their voter rolls that the GOP took this across America. And then they came up with new ways of purging voters. 800,000 purged in Ohio. How could Obama win that state twice? And then the Democrats had to write it off this year because they removed 800,000 Democratic voters. Not that the Democratic Party did anything about it. They don't. That's our job. That's National Lawyers Guilds, ACLU. NAACP, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all these organizations I work with. I work very closely with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Rainbow Push. Don't count on the Democratic Party to save your votes, and I'll tell you why. Ask Mr. Padilla why you can't count on the Democratic Party. If you look in my book, How Trump Stole 2020, which, by the way, is a prediction, not a warning. Here you go. How Trump Stole 2020. Still worth looking at. In fact, the National Bar Association, which is the African American Bar Association, has just ordered several hundred books as training manuals to explain how votes are stolen in America. You can get it too. And by the way, one way to get the book, How Trump Stole 2020, is to just go to gregpalast.com. And this week, you can download the e-version of the book for free. You can download the audio version of the book for free, which includes, by the way, my discussion with Stacey Abrams live on that tape. And you can also get the comic book of how they stole the election called The Art of the Steal, which I wrote with the great comic artist Ted Rall. If you remember, Ted Rall was fired by the LA Times for lampooning the police brutality in Los Angeles. I can't make that up. So Ted Rall was fired by the LA Times because his cartoons made fun of the cops. So that allowed me to hire him to make a comic book of this election. So you can download that for free. It's called The Art of the Steal. Go to gregpalast.com. You can also get those videos, the 1-minute video, the 14-minute released by DiCaprio. We're continuing on this month. Make sure that anyone that you know in Georgia checks their registration. And I don't care, like Christine Jordan, like King's cousin, if they've been voting for 50 years at the same station, I don't care. They can still purge you, remove you from the voter rolls. Always check your registration. That's at go to gregpalast.com or savemyvote2020.org. See if you're on the purge list. If you are, re-register by December 7th. And one final thing. So they stole this election. They didn't steal it enough to steal the White House yet. We're not sure. That's another discussion. They couldn't steal enough votes. And in Georgia, they couldn't steal enough votes to avoid a runoff. John Ossoff, the Democrat running, absolutely won if you let everyone vote. But there's something else too that, and I'll throw out one other thing. The Democratic Party went through this, what I call mail-in madness. According to Caltech and MIT voting, the voting project. So at MIT, they analyze voting in America. And they found out, are you ready for this? 22% of all mail-in ballots don't get counted. That's in a good year. 22%, 1 in 5 ballots. I just checked Gwinnett County, Atlanta. 30% of all mail-in ballots have been rejected. 30%. And we all know because the Republicans said don't mail in your votes, the Democrats said mail in your votes. I heard this guy, Joe Biden, he's not an expert in this field at all, but he was saying that if you mail in your votes, don't worry, it will be counted. But I haven't seen Joe in Atlanta saying count those ballots. 30% that were thrown in the garbage. 30%. And there was the victory for John Ossoff. Not that I'm for or against John Ossoff. I'm for the voters picking our senators, the voters picking our president. That doesn't happen too often in America. We don't discuss the non-vote. So when you mail in your ballot, first just throw it in the garbage. Okay, don't go postal, ever. I know you could die by waiting in line. Well, a lot of people die fighting for the right to vote. Just put on your gloves, your mask, and of course, bring a couple lawyers from the Lawyers Guild with you always when you're voting. Very good idea. I'll let you go. I'll answer your questions, and I'll turn over the floor to someone more expert than me, to Colleen Flynn. Thank you so much. You guys are great.
Greg, thank you so much. I'm filled with questions. I think our group is filled with questions, but let's get a view from the streets and the kind of work that Colleen does. Please take it away, Colleen.
Good morning, everybody. Like I said during the intros, I am so honored to be here with you and to see some of my former clients here. I wanted to start maybe with a little bit of an overview of protests in Los Angeles over the last 20 or so years and what has changed in light of starting with the George Floyd protests. So I know that a lot of you have been around, have gotten arrested, have participated in protests, have participated in civil disobedience, have been arrested. So you're a pretty sophisticated group when it comes to what's happening on the streets of Los Angeles. So, I go back to about the DNC in LA in 2000 and those protests. So what we've seen as the Guild in terms of the currents in how the LAPD has responded to protests. That was the first protest that I attended where I saw a lot of repression by the LAPD. The use of less lethal weapons, the use of hard projectiles, rubber bullets used improperly, shot directly at people who were protesting. Many of you might know Carol Sobel. She was shot right between the eyes in the forehead. And then, then there would be like a couple of years without a big incident, and then there would be another one. So I think maybe one of the next things that happened after that, at a few of the October 22nd marches and demonstrations against police brutality, the police LAPD violently attacked those events. There was Justice for Janitors, which maybe was before the DNC. But there would be like one event where the police were completely out of control. Usually there were mass arrests and injuries by the police. After that, I'm sure a lot of you remember May Day 2007 in MacArthur Park, where the Metro Division of the Los Angeles Police Department literally engaged in a police riot. In that incident, there were not a lot of arrests, but there were a lot of injuries. I know a lot of you engage in journalism, so you might not appreciate this comment from me, but May Day 2007, the police attacked the journalists, which I have to say, in my experience, is the best way to get honest coverage from the media about what actually happens at a protest where the police engage in indiscriminate violence. So that really was, I think, a little bit of a turning point. The police were really shamed. The police chief had to go on TV, the mayor apologized. They not only did they attack journalists, but they attacked immigrant women, children, grandmothers. That had been a very family oriented event. And there were a lot of people in the park that day when they got attacked. Jumping forward from there, I think the next big protest with arrests, I'm sure I'm missing something, but the next one that comes to mind is in 2014, we had the non-indictment protests when the police officer who had killed Mike Brown in Ferguson in St. Louis, they made the decision that he would not be indicted and not be prosecuted. Protests broke out across the country. And I would say that the protests around Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin and the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement really changed the nature of protest in Los Angeles. I think people were really politicized and galvanized by those movements. And I think that it's been a really positive change for the protest scene in Los Angeles and also the political consciousness and bringing new generations and new thought into how we perceive street protests. And one of the things that has been, I think, a positive is that a lot of people started organizing protests without asking for permits. So the idea is we're not going to go to the people who we are protesting against, protesting their violence, protesting their racism, and ask them for permission to protest them. So of course, people still get permits, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I support whatever strategy social movements want to engage. The Guild is here to support you. But if you don't want to ask for permission, we have your back. So let me see. So that was around Thanksgiving of 2014, and there was a non-permitted march. And what we see often with the LAPD is what appears is that they just get tired of the protests. Like, okay, time for this to be shut down. And they'll issue a dispersal order that is patently unconstitutional and unlawful. So a little legal lesson: for a dispersal order at a protest to be lawful, the police have to make it audible. Everybody has to be able to hear it. The police have megaphones. They have speakers on their cars. But so often they don't make the attempt to actually make sure that everyone in a crowd can hear the dispersal order. The dispersal order has to give you time to disperse. There's 1,000 people in a cul-de-sac, and they say you have 2 minutes to leave or you'll be arrested. Obviously, that is not enough time. So they have given a defective dispersal order if they do not give you enough time to disperse. Another issue is they need to give you a manner to safely leave. Oftentimes, this is how mass arrests happen. They say, you have a certain amount of time, and then they just cordon everybody off, and everyone is kettled, and no one can leave. So again, unconstitutional dispersal order. As a criminal defense attorney, we kind of love it when they give a bad dispersal order, because then you have a defense to whatever they're claiming you were arrested for. But so just so you all know what is required in a lawful dispersal order. So when you have these unpermitted marches, at some point the police decide, okay, we're done with this, or even a permitted march, and now we're going to arrest everybody. So that was the Mike Brown protest, the non-indictment protests in 2014, Thanksgiving. People were corralled by the downtown public library. If you're familiar with that, I'm sure a lot of you are. On Hope Street, you know, there's that little kind of cul-de-sac, and they cornered everybody in there and arrested them. And then fast forward to the Donald Trump election, there were protests. A lot of people were arrested, but a lot of people were arrested on the freeway. And as I'm sure you all can imagine, it's a little bit harder to get people off when they go onto the freeway, but it happens, and we were able to. I don't think there were any convictions for the freeway protests. And then fast forward to what happened over the summer. I think what happened over the summer was a perfect storm. We were all home, COVID, anxiety about the pandemic, anxiety about the economy, anxiety about people losing housing. And we're all home watching together as people are killed around the country. You have February 23rd, Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia. We all saw that video. March 13th, Breonna Taylor was killed in Kentucky. And by the time May 25th happened and George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, it was just a tinderbox. And I think, you know, the youth who were, you know, having cabin fever just exploded onto the streets. And there were thousands of arrests. So, and the arrests were happening every day. So, you know, I went through these last 20 years, we could count up the mass arrests or the, you know, police riots on two hands. And all of a sudden it was every day there was a huge protest, and people were being arrested in the thousands. So the Guild had to ramp up. You know, where a lot of you know us, we've worked together for a long time, and we are a small, pretty scrappy organization. And all of a sudden we had to figure out, what do we do? How do we keep track of all of these people? How do we help them? So we figured the best thing we could do is try to just get rid of as many of the criminal cases as possible before filing. So I'm sure some of you know this, but others might not. When you get arrested by the police and you get taken to the police station and booked, they take your fingerprints, they take your photographs, or even if you're just given a citation in the field, a notice to appear, that is just the beginning stage of a criminal case. That doesn't necessarily mean that criminal charges are going to be filed against you. The police then forward their notes, their videos, your booking information, their police reports to the prosecuting agency. So within the city of LA, that would be the city attorney's office. For the county and other areas, it would be the district attorney's office. And then they make a decision about filing, what charges are going to be filed. And actually, the ICJP arrests from October 7th, 2011 are an excellent example of how this works. So I want to talk a little bit about my fabulous clients, Carol Francis, Ralph Furtick, Lucy, and Jonathan Crampner. I think at least two of you are on this meeting today. So on October 7th, 2011, about a dozen ICUJP activists were arrested protesting the war in Afghanistan. You all did get a permit for a march in downtown Los Angeles. You locked arms in the street after the protest in front of the federal building, and you were singing beautiful songs. And Captain Chamberlain from the Los Angeles Police Department gave a dispersal order. I think he actually gave a legal dispersal order. But you refused to comply, and one by one were taken into custody. I don't have a video of this, but if any of you do have a video, you should absolutely send it around. The videos were really touching. The songs were beautiful. The majority of the people who were arrested took a First Amendment class. So what we had negotiated at that time with the city attorney's office was that if people take this class where they kind of patronizingly tell you about your First Amendment rights and how what you did was wrong, but they're not going to prosecute you this time. The majority took that class in order to not have charges filed against them. However, some of you on moral grounds refused to take that class. And at the last minute, okay, so another little legal lesson for misdemeanor and infraction charges, they only have 1 year from the date of your arrest to file charges. So if they don't file the charges within that year, they cannot file against you. So at the last minute, right before the year was up, they did charge Carol Francis, Ralph Furtick, Lucy, and Jonathan with a few infractions. So we organized a little legal team to represent everybody, and we had a trial. And I have to say, I was very, very impressed with your group's ability to, I would say, have a little political theater at the trial. Ralph Furtick insisted, he was having problems walking, and he insisted on walking dramatically up to give his testimony. It was fantastic. The captain from the Los Angeles Police Department clearly did not want to testify against you all. And I remember when he first took the witness stand and looked at you all sitting down below, he waved. It was adorable. Luckily, the city attorney's office failed to file charges correctly. And so we just won on the technicality because you had absolutely blocked the street. But I remember the judge was frustrated, you can't do that. And it was so fantastic. And I loved working with you. So that's just your little legal lesson about how it works in terms of from arrest or citation to the city attorney's office or prosecuting office to trial. Does anybody actually have any questions? I don't know who's moderating, but if you could look and see if anyone has any questions.
Let me, first of all, thank you very much to both our speakers. ICUJP believes that activism and being in the streets is part and parcel of elections, that the entire process is a seamless reaction of the public. And I'm convinced that the massive reckoning that went on this year was itself a first step or a step in organizing, and then later getting people registered and getting them out to vote. So for us, this is a seamless process, and that's why we spent some time today looking at the kinds of protest and the support that we've gotten from the National Lawyers Guild. Let me just kick this off internally with a question to Greg. Do we have a chance, and we know it depends, frankly, on Georgia and the 2 Senate races, whether the Democrats take control of the Senate, but putting politics, putting partisan politics aside, in addition to lawsuits and the kind of investigative journalism you've engaged in, it is a scandal to listen to you describing what people try to call the American democracy when so many people are disenfranchised, and the disenfranchisement itself is so disproportionately people of color. So are there reforms? Are there changes if we are moving gingerly into a new era that we can address this? And what do activists organizations, what role can we play?
Well, let me start with that last one. Only activist organizations are going to make the difference. What, are you going to ask Joe Biden to save your vote? He didn't do it this time. So you look at Colleen. The Lawyers Guild had a lot more to do with the victory, with Joe Biden getting into the White House. Not that the Lawyers Guild or Greg Palast, because I'm a journalist, I got the Palast Investigative Fund. We're not there to elect Democrats. We are there to protect voters. And just this time, the voters, it looks like, may have picked the president. So it's only activists, as we learned. Look, there have been, when you say, is there any hope? Well, there's always been hope there has been a 250-year march towards voting rights, but it often slips backwards. One of the things we've learned, when I just told you about removing a third of a million people before Stacey Abrams' race in Georgia, overwhelmingly Black people, she cited that. She said, I won. She cited my studies. Said, I won, but I won't be inaugurated. That was a first for a Democrat. I'd never heard that before from a Democrat. Of course, it wasn't just a Democrat. It was a Black Democrat. There are still two Democratic parties. There's, in 1964, the Democratic Party was divided into the Dixiecrats and the Freedom Democrats. The Freedom Democrats being the organization out of the South with Black folk believing in the right of everyone to vote. We still have that split in the Democratic Party, but we don't give it those labels. It's very subtle. It's not those who are actively trying to remove Black voters. It's simply those who won't defend Black voters versus those who will. And usually the people that will defend Black voters are Black voters and Black officials, and other activists like yourselves. Now, I'm playing whack-a-mole because every year they come up with a new trick. In Georgia, it was, you're a mover. This is the new trick for this year. These movers created by this list, Eric list, and we had the interstate cross-check. We've had a lot of things I've exposed. Because they used to use white sheets to scare away, the Klan, to scare away Black people. For good reason, they would hang people. You got lynched if you tried to vote and you were African-American. 3,200 African-Americans, in fact, were lynched in the years leading up to the Voting Rights Act. 3,200 lynchings. Now, including white people like Goodman and Schwerner, who died with young Black man Cheney. This is how we make the difference. We expose them and we overwhelm them, because that's the other thing. You can't steal all the votes all the time. But right now we have to train people how to vote and how to protect their vote. And number one is telling people, you think you're registered, forget it. So we have to work on that. The other thing is we cannot allow. The other thing we need, one of the reasons we may not get a lot of joy out of the Democratic Party is that they are part of the problem. In California, if you look in my book, How Trump Stole 2020, and again, you can download it for free or you can buy it still. Download it for free from gregpalast.com. But there's a section called California Riemann. And working with the California poll, which is the top experts on voting in America, in California, we calculated that Alex Padilla, the Democratic Secretary of State, like Brian Kemp, like Catherine Harris, a violently partisan official in charge of voting, that he prevented 553,000 voters from voting for Bernie Sanders. Quite a sophisticated operation. How do you take away 500,000 votes? Well, you mail out 3.5 million ballots without Bernie Sanders' name on them. Let me repeat that. California sent out 3.5 million ballots without Bernie Sanders' name. How do they get away with this? Well, those are the independent voters, so-called, or NPP, no party preference voters. And in California, almost all independents, 80% of independents say they want to vote in the Democratic primary, which is their right, but they make it difficult to do that. So if you don't specifically ask for a Democratic Party ballot, and you can't just ask for a Democratic Party ballot, you have to use the magic words, I want a crossover Democratic Party ballot. You don't get it. You get a ballot without the Democratic candidates for president. This is a brilliant gimmick. So you have literally, so that's one of the problems we run into. So we have to deal with Democrats and Republicans. Okay.
No, that's very important. And it's important to realize it happens across political lines.
Yeah.
So I had kind of a question that goes across the things. One of the things you didn't talk about, Greg, is the impact of mass incarceration on disenfranchising people. I know that in Florida, the voters actually voted to restore the voting rights of former felons, and then the state legislature there passed all these restrictions. And I'm wondering, basically saying people had to pay all kinds of fines and so on, kind of a poll tax. There's some here in California. We just voted to restore the rights of people on parole from California, and I'm wondering what can be done to what are other restrictions like that are still in effect, or what are ways that people can be re-enfranchised who lost their franchise because they got locked up?
That's a very, very important question. And I was just discussing that with actually Reverend Jesse Jackson. We have about 9 million ex-cons in America who have the right to vote, but are not registered. 9 million. This would change the political face of America. The problem is that most of those ex-cons don't know they have the right to vote. And therefore, because there's no state anymore. After Florida changed its law, there are no states left, which permanently take away your right to vote for a felony conviction. The problem is that states are still taking away people's right to vote for felony conviction, even when it's not the law. I saw 50,000 people removed in Colorado. There's no law taking away ex-con votes, but they remove them anyway. People are afraid. In Florida, 1.4 million ex-cons have been disenfranchised. 1.4 million, and about 88% are Democrats. Democrats don't like to talk about that. It's 88% of ex-cons are Democrats, and or would vote Democratic, and so in Florida, when they passed this law, the legislature then said, well, you've got to pay your fines and your court fees. And I know some rich guys, even LeBron and others, have said, oh, they'll pay those fines. Here's the problem. The reason why Trump stole that state was by not allowing these 1.4 million people. So you're talking about 1.2 million Democrats were barred from voting because of this rule that you have to pay your fines. And I say, well, why don't they just pay the fines or have someone pay them? You don't know what the fines are. Go ahead. You're convicted 30 years ago for 2 joints in your pocket in Gainesville, Florida. No one has those records. No one knows what those fines are. No one has kept track. And so what happens is that you have to sign up, vote, and take the chance that you will go to prison. In fact, Florida said that they would, if they find out that someone still owed money and they voted, they go back to prison 5 years in the slammer for voting illegally. So they basically scared away people from having their rights, from exercising their rights. What we have to do is again, try to overwhelm the steal. I cannot recommend to any ex-con in Florida that they should vote. I will say in other states, we got to do a massive campaign of registering ex-cons because the Democrats won't do it. I will say that there's been some great progress. Someplace, for example, in Los Angeles, I will say the county clerk has gone into the prisons. We have, according to Jesse Jackson, about 1 million people in jails and prison right now who are either awaiting trial or have only been convicted of misdemeanors. They are allowed to vote in every state. Now, almost every state, not all, but almost every state does say you cannot vote if you are if you're serving time for a felony. If while you were literally in prison or on parole or probation. As you just said, California is just now changing that rule a bit. But so what we need to do is literally go to the prisons and get people registered and help them vote. In Texas, you'll love this. One of the states with the highest incarceration rates in America, you have to have an excuse to vote absentee, to mail in your ballot. And you cannot say incarceration is not considered a legitimate excuse. But how do you get out to vote? Versus, by the way, Cook County, which is Chicago, where they actually put a polling station in Cook County jail. Because most people there are misdemeanors or waiting trial. And so they literally put in a polling station in the prison.
Wow.
That's what we need.
That's good information. Let's do something as time gets close. We have 2 people with their hands raised. Let me hear questions from them, one after another. And if our speakers will pay attention, they can gather up these 2 questions and respond to them. So we'll hear first from Dick Bunce and then Carol Francis.
It's hard to imagine a more sacred right than the right to vote. At what point does a person who is willfully instigating voter suppression, subject to criminal offense, criminal violation, and to serve serious penalties for a criminal act?
Greg, thank you so much. I know you started living and writing in England because at the time you couldn't get anybody in the US to print your materials. And I'm wondering, has that changed? And what is the international, England plus whatever other countries, where people are hearing your information? And does it affect anything in the US to have people in England know that the presidents in the US are illegally elected?
Well, that's a very tough one. Yep. Look, I was writing for The Guardian, and I was a reporter for the BBC, a big nightly news program, an investigative reporter for BBC Newsnight. And my work has covered Arte in Europe and Telesur South America, all over Australia. So my work is very well known around the world, except it's not published in the US. So it bounces off the electronic wall here in most cases. But so I try to work through the Samis outlets. And there's I write for Rolling Stone, the AARP rock and roll newsletter. And then I write, I'll sneak in something in a Nation, or I'll get an op-ed in The Guardian or something. Like go back to my old Guardian haunt. In fact, I did my investigation of California voting for The Guardian this year. But again, the US outlets, you have no idea. In fact, the Washington Post reporters really wanted to pick up this story of the mass purges, and their editors nixed it. They say, well, you can't talk about it. It's unbelievable. The editors at the Washington Post said, well, it's highly partisan. What does that mean? Well, because we've identified that the people being shafted out of their votes are Black people, and that's, of course, almost all Democrats. So it's obviously partisan to talk about vote theft because I'm talking about Black folk. I mean, I can't make this stuff up. That's the Washington Post. I'm going through, I'm getting this type of stuff. When we successfully sued and won the case against the Secretary of State of Georgia. That's not a small matter. It was covered by the Washington Post and New York Times, not by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So the Georgia's own paper didn't cover a massive story about exposing the theft of votes by their Secretary of State. They literally didn't cover it. And then of course the other thing that I do have is, well, outlets like this where we get the word out, but the other is through African-American media. My word is getting out all over the place. So we have to just, we have to work it our own way. That's why instead of putting it out, that's why I'm working, for example, with the DiCaprio family, because when Leonardo DiCaprio posts my videos, and we sent out, if you recognize the voice, that was Yvette Nicole Brown. The other film is narrated by Deborah Messing. So we literally put those films out not only on Leo DiCaprio's site, but out of Entertainment Weekly. And what's great about that, now it'd be nice, I'd say, well, where's MSNBC or the New York Times or whatever? Those people already know that they're registered, they're registered, they'll vote. That's not the issue. By going through Entertainment Weekly, by working with celebrities, we really reach out to the people who have to be reached. That's the key. So, we just have to use all these Sami's methods of getting the word out. One way is to download the book and send it off to people. So whatever works, but I appreciate your asking.
Great. Greg, what about that question? Has anyone been prosecuted for voter suppression?
No, is the answer. Because look, vote theft is the perfect crime. Because when you steal the vote, you steal the vote police, the Justice Department's Civil Rights and Voting Rights divisions. So that you got Bill Barr is the cop. Who's he going to bust? John Ashcroft was not going to bust George Bush or Jeb Bush for stealing Florida in 2000. Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, he's the guy in charge of the vote. He stole the votes, stole the election. Who's going to bust him? Right? In 18. The Trump Justice Department. So no, these guys, it's the perfect crime because when you steal the vote, you steal the cops. I'm very, very concerned about this, but that doesn't mean that we lose. I want to take away the concept of despair. No, you're not going to have the Justice Department save you. You're not going to have the Democratic Party save you. None of these, you're not going to have the mainstream media expose the problem and save you. We have to do it ourselves. So we have to take our information, download my comic book and send it around. Download or point people to that 1-minute film you just saw or the longer one. This is how we get the word out. That's the key. We can't rely on anyone, and they're not going to bust. No, they don't. It's pretty rare. It's almost non-existent to be busted for stealing someone's vote.
Wow. Greg, thank you for that and everything. I want to give Colleen a last word as we close. And really, Greg kind of set it up. What do you see as the role of public protests in a Biden administration? Do we all stay home now? Everything's fine? And what role do you think the National Lawyers Guild is going to play in the future?
Well, I don't think that police violence cares who's president. So I think that absolutely we're going to continue to see these protests because we have not had the systemic change that we need to end the violence. So I think the role of the National Lawyers Guild is going to continue to be imperative, both through our Legal Observer program, where we're out there with the green hats, observing police misconduct and also hopefully deterring police misconduct. Those Legal Observer notes get sent to the criminal defense attorneys. that represent people who are arrested at those protests, because as we know, the police's version of events is often flawed, incorrect, a lie. And also to the civil rights attorneys who represent people who are unlawfully arrested and injured at these protests by the police. So just so you all know, in light of the ramping up of the protests, the arrests, the injuries, the huge groundswell in the movement, we have had to also increase our capacity. So we have hired a full-time legal observer coordinator who coordinates all of our legal observers, because the protests and the police have become so much more violent. We have all sorts of new protocols to keep our legal observers safe. If anyone is interested in becoming a legal observer, we have legal observer trainings by Zoom. You can get trained to become a legal observer. We have just hired a mass defense coordinator to help coordinate all of this, our Know Your Rights trainings, our press releases, keeping track of everyone who's arrested. And also this Sunday is our annual dinner. And if you want to see what we've been up to and celebrate the Guild with us, you are all invited to our Guild dinner, and you can get information about that on the website. If you want to support our work, support all of the new staffing that we have done, we encourage you to donate. We make sure that our employees are paid well and have good benefits, and that is really difficult to sustain. So if you want to help us, we would love to have your support. So thank you.
I am so proud of the work you're doing. We all are very close to Jim Lafferty, former National Lawyers Guild ED and KPFK host. To both you and Greg, it gives us hope that people like you are doing this work every day. And please know that ICUJP stands in solidarity with you. We are not going to give in to any form of police or political repression. So we're built for this period. We know we're going to have to do a lot of hard work going forward, and having allies like you means the world to us.